We're at the bottom of Mem Base Summit Base 42b, last two lines, and today's daf is Mem Gimel. In the Mishnah, it listed 7, 8 things that contain chametz, and that one would transgress over them. And Rabbi Eliezer added tachshitei nashim, which generally means toiletries, perfumes, etc. So tachshitei nashim sal kedaitach. Do you think that makeup and such are going to have chametz in them and therefore need to be removed? Ela ema af tipulei nashim. So it's referring to, as we mentioned briefly at the end of yesterday, the flour-based paste that was used as a hair removal. Damar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, as Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, B'nois Yisrael Shagil Lepirkim V'Lagil Shanim. Young women who want to remove their hair because it seemed embarrassing for them. They were either young and had not yet reached the age of puberty, so they would remove their hair. So B'nois Aniyim Teiflis as a Basid. Poor women would remove it with plaster, and B'nois Hashirim Teiflis as a Basoiles, they would use flour, a paste, and then would harden, and then it would pull it off. B'nois Melachim B'Shem Amor, and daughters of kings, people that were very wealthy, they would use more oil. Shanema says, as it says by Esther, that all the women being brought to Achashverosh were given a Shemen Hamor treatment for 6 months. So my Shemen Hamor, what is that? So Ravuna bar Yirmiyah Omer Satres. It's something called Satres, which Rashi here says he doesn't know what it is, but elsewhere Rashi says it's balsam oil. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Shemen Zayish Levi Shlish. It's olive oil from olives that had not ripened. They're not a third ripened, so the idea is that they're still pretty acidic, and they would remove the hairs and soften the skin. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda says, "An piknin Shemen Zayish Levi Shlish." This potion called Ampiknin had olive oil that did not, oil from olives that did not fully ripen. And I say, and why would people use it? It removes hairs and softens the skin. In any case, as regards to Pesach goes, this other type of paste waxing that they would use was made out of chametz, and Rabbi Eliezer says that too would have to be removed, and there's a transgression if somebody has it or eats it. So we're going to have the Mishnah then concludes with a generalization, a klal. Zeh klal. Kol shehu min dagan. Anything that is made of a type of dagan, of grains. If we're going to say that anything that has a min dagan, that's made out of these grains, you're going to transgress on Pesach. So why did the Mishnah have to enumerate the 7, 8 things that enumerated? It was sufficient to just say anything that has chametz in it. So that everybody would recognize them and be accustomed to what they have, what the ingredients in this item is, and know their names. Why is that necessary? Because when you encounter it and you don't know what's in it, you're not going to know to keep away. So just like somebody who came from Eretz Yisrael, and he came to Babylon, to Bavel, and he wanted to eat meat. He said, "Is there any? Is there a dip that I can use for my bread?" Shama de Kamri Kirvile Kutach. So you heard they said, bring him some kutach. Now, he wouldn't have known what kutach is because he's from Eretz Yisrael and they didn't eat kutach. In fact, elsewhere, the Gemara says that they said, Bavlei Tipshai, foolish Babylonians, that they dip bread in bread. They dip bread into kutach, which has moldy bread and sour milk, etc. And so they're using a bread-based dip for bread. In any case, but because he knew from this Mishnah the ingredients and the contents of kutach, that it has chametz in it, as well as that it has dairy in it, and he was going to eat meat in this meal. So given the shama kutach, once he heard shama, the kutach was being brought piresh, he decided not to have it because he wanted to eat meat. So it's important to know what it is that you have and be right and recognize the names and items to know that what it is one is either consuming or using, and that's why the Mishnah enumerated them. But indeed, the generalization is sufficient. Hare elu bahazhara. As Amish said, this is going to be a prohibition. The next Gemara is going to get into a couple of drushes to help us understand the basis for our Mishnah. So there are two types of chametz that are not just classic chametz. It's not bread or cake, etc. There's chametz b'taravis. So that's a chametz gama b'taravis means you have an actual chametz, but it's not the only ingredient. So you added flour to something, and it's a mixture with other things as well. Take, for instance, kutach that we just mentioned. It's got milk in there, it's got salt, other ingredients perhaps, but it also has bread in there. So it is actual chametz, but it's b'tarabis, it's in a mixture of other things as well. Versus the second part of the Mishnah that has items that are made entirely of chametz, the item we spoke about before that, where there's a paste made out of flour and water to remove hair as a waxing, but that's chametz nuksha. That's hard chametz, meaning not really edible. It's not proper chametz that's edible, but nevertheless is chametz. So the two we have two things here: actual edible real chametz, but it's in a mixture with other things, versus not really edible chametz, but it's the only thing. So we're going to have a machlokas of which one of these is more likely, or the one that should be prohibited, and where we learn the additional prohibitions for ta'aroves, for a mixture of chametz, or for chametz nuksha, for hard chametz really not so edible, to say that those are also included in the prohibition, and the two opinions of which one is more the one to be chametz, to be prohibited. So mantana the chametz gomor dagan gomor al yedei tarevis. Our Mishnah enumerates both. So whose opinion is that says both chametz gomor al yedei tarevis, even though that it's in a mixture, since it's proper chametz, as well as v'noiksha be'ene, and hardened chametz, not really edible chametz, but it's alone, belav, that both of them are a Torah prohibition. Now the Gemara understands that if you had this hardened chametz, not really edible chametz, in a mixture with other things, that wouldn't be a Torah prohibition. However, hardened chametz alone, or real chametz, or proper chametz in a mixture, how do we know that those are belav in a Torah prohibition? Amar of Yehuda Amarav, Rabbi Meir. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, we learned seor, dough that had not yet fully risen or become leavened, become chametz. So yisaref, it needs to be burnt, meaning even though that it's just at the level of seor, it's already chametz and needs to be burnt. And you can give it to your dog, which means that you're allowed to benefit from it. It's not fully chametz. And if somebody eats it, they get 40 lashes, meaning it is chametz. So what's going on here? This is a self-contradictory Mishnah. Hagufa kasha brisa. Hagufa kasha. We have a contradiction in and of itself. Amr say or Yisarei. First, you say that this level of becoming chametz, of having fermented. So this dough is seor. It's already enough, leavened enough that Yisarei, if it needs to be burned, alma isar asar b'hana. By the fact that you say that it needs to be burned, it's asar b'hana. And then you tell me that you can give it to a dog, which is alma mutabana, which tells me that it's not really prohibited and that you're allowed to benefit from it. So what's going on? That's a contradiction. So actually, in order to understand this, we have to understand that later on this week, we're going to see that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda disagree at what level do we get something to be chametz already. So you make a dough and you let it sit. At what point does it become chametz? So this level of seir, Rabbi Meir says, as soon as the outer layer of the dough starts getting pale, it starts hardening a little bit and getting pale, that's enough to say that's become chametz proper. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says no, that's not enough. That's enough to say you can't eat it because maybe it's chametz. There's some level there that it's already rising, and you cannot and you can't eat it. But it's not proper chametz yet until there are cracks in the outer layer that sort of like pigeon's feet. That the cracks and the splits. The Gemara calls it karnei chagavim, like grasshopper horns, right? Meaning that there's a split and a split off the split as the dough rises. That's when it is chametz proper. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the level of chametz proper of Rabbi Meir is not really chametz proper. Rabbi Meir has an earlier level of where hichsifu paneha, the outer layer, starts becoming more pale and drying. So the Gemara explains, Hachi Kamar, this is what this brisa is saying. Seir Yisaref, that whatever is Seir, it needs to be burned. The Rabbi Meir, the Rabbi Meir. Whatever level, according to Rabbi Meir, is chametz, he says has to be burnt at that level. And the Rabbi Yehuda, whatever Rabbi Yehuda says, which is where this karnei chagavim, where it starts splitting, the Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that needs to be burnt. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, continuing in his opinion, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when the chametz is only up to Rabbi Meir's level, you're allowed to give it to your dog. You can't eat it yourself because it's quasi chametz already, but it's not prohibited in benefit yet because it hasn't dried out and starts splitting and risen to that level. The Rabbi Meir, the Rabbi Yehuda. So that's Rabbi Meir's level of chametz, of having risen, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which isn't proper chametz. And if you eat it, you get lashes, meaning that there's a Torah prohibition, asal Rabbi Meir. That's according to Rabbi Meir, that eating this lower level of having risen and the outer layer becomes whitened and dried, that's going to be chametz according to Rabbi Meir. And according to him, anybody who eats that transgresses the Torah prohibition and is punishable by malchus. So this clearly is not yet edible chametz. It's noksha. It's a dough that hasn't fully risen, and nevertheless, balav. We see that there's a Torah prohibition of eating this dough. The kolch ken chametz gamer al yedei taravos. And so this version is going to say Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, who says that this, who brings this brisa, is of the opinion that if you hold a chametz noksha, hardened, not edible chametz, is going to be a Torah prohibition. For sure, proper chametz that's in a mixture with other food is going to be a Torah prohibition. And so he says, "V'kol shekain," and for sure, that chametz dagin gomer, proper chametz, of grains, ayidei tarovis, just because it's in a mixture of something else, is also going to be a Torah prohibition. However, Rav Nachman learns the other way around. Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Lezin. This is the opinion of Rabbi Lezin. The time we learned chametz dag and gomer anish kares. Proper chametz that has fully risen, there's kares. If there's a Torah, the punishment is kares. Somebody eats it, their soul is cut off from its source. Al eruvay. If there's a mixture of chametz, balav. That's not the severity of kares. The punishment is not as strong. However, nevertheless, it is a regular prohibition. It's a Torah prohibition. You're not allowed to eat it, even though that it's in a mixture. Different, Rabbi Eliezer. However, the Chachamim disagree. Al chametz dagan gamor anish kares. They do agree that proper chametz alone, eating a piece of bread on Pesach, is kares. Al eruvay. On a mixture like this kutach, where you have the bread in the sour milk to create this dip, but that's not prohibited. Once it's in a mixture, the Chachamim say it's not prohibited at all. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says that there is a Torah prohibition on that. So what we hear from Rabbi Eliezer is that a proper chametz that's in a mixture with something else is a Torah prohibition. And then for sure, Nerksha, hardened chametz, that is alone, without any other mixture, it's going to be prohibited. So Rav Nachman, who is of the opinion that chametz gomer in a mixture is a lesser degree of prohibition because it's in a mixture, but the chametz gomer, and he says nevertheless there's a Torah prohibition, for sure he would hold that Rabbi Eliezer would hold that chametz nerksha alone, hardened chametz, such as this paste that the girls will make it to remove their hair as in a waxing, that would also be a Torah prohibition. So we have an opinion of Rabbi Meir that says that hardened chametz, not proper chametz, is going to be a Torah prohibition. We have an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that chametz betarovis, proper chametz in a mixture, is going to be a Torah prohibition. And each one, Rav Yehuda in the first version and Rav Nachman in the second version, say if that's true, then for sure the other should also be should be included in this prohibition. So the Gemara asks Rav Nachman, "My time Rav Yehuda. Why didn't Rav Nachman say like Rav Yehuda that Rabbi Meir, who says that chametz, that hardened chametz is prohibited, that it will also include the proper chametz in a mixture, and then he could say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir." So Rav Nachman says, who said that Rabbi Meir would agree? Maybe he only said it in a hardened chametz because it's all alone. That's all you have. You have your flour and water rising. So that's going to be, even though it's not proper chametz yet because it's not edible, really edible. But nevertheless, if you eat it, you're going to transgress. But who tells you that even if you have proper chametz, a piece of bread, but it's in a mixture, in an egg pudding, in a bread pudding or whatever, so then it's going to be permissible, or at least not a Torah prohibition? For Rabbi Yehuda, my time Rav Nachman, and Rabbi Yehuda, why didn't you say that it's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, like Rav Nachman said? Maybe Rabbi Eliezer only said it in chametz dag and gomer when it's a proper chametz edible and it's a piece of bread. But just a non-edible, a hardened paste made out of flour and water that's typically used for removing hair or something like that, that wouldn't be included. Look. So we now know that each one of these has an opinion in the Brisa. However, we still don't know for sure who it can be in our Mishnah that holds both of them are Torah prohibitions, and the list would then list both. And Rav Yehuda offered that it's Rabbi Meir, Rav Nachman offered that it is Rabbi Eliezer, and even though it's not explicit in either of their opinions, each one thinks that it's a Kal V'chomer. If they said it on this, for sure they'd say it on the other. Tani Kava say to Rav Yehuda. So we have a brisa that concurs with Rav Yehuda, essentially saying that Rabbi Meir is going to hold both prohibitions. Because the Torah says, Kol machmetzes lo sechelu. So there are really three verses that are important in Shmos Yud Beis, in Shmos 12, 12:20. The Torah says, Kol machmetzes lo sechelu, any leavened or leavening shall not be eaten. In all of your dwelling places you shall eat matzah. Then it says a few verses beforehand, there's a pasuk also that says anybody that eats, but it says kichol ochel chametz, anybody that eat chametz. So and that's in 12:15. So in 12:15 in Shemos in Yud Beis Tesvav, there it says anybody that eats chametz. In 12:20 it says any type of chametz, any machmetzes. Now it doesn't even say chametz; it says machmetzes, which is really any leavening, as opposed to chametz, any leavened bread. So any leavening, which we're going to see includes other things as well, because it says kol. Now there's another pasuk, and this is in 19. In 12:19, it says 7 days you shall not find chametz in your house, because kichol ochel machmetzes, because anybody that eats machmetzes. So we have twice that the Torah says machmetzes, not just chametz, which means leavened bread, but also leavening, machmetzes. And it says it on kol machmetzes lezachelu, all leavening, which is on the item, and also kichol ochel chametz, or kichol ochel machmetzes, that it's anybody eating. So it's talking about the person, not the item. So we're going to have, and it says kol, it says all. So we have these extra teachings. So the Gemara says, kol machmetzes lo sechelu. This is the brisa. Any leavening shall not be eaten. Why does it say that? The list of 4 items that come from different countries that have a grain mixed into the ingredients. Well, it says that any leavening may not be eaten. So I know that kuta habavli and so on. So perhaps it's to the level that if somebody eats any of these mixtures, that they will transgress, and the punishment is kares, their soul is cut off from the source. That's why in verse 15 it says, anybody that eats chametz, their soul is cut off. Proper chametz, not in a mixture. That's where there's the anish kares. But in a mixture, such as in the kutach, or in the mixture of beer, or in the vinegar, etc., there it's not going to be punishable with kares. Dagan gomer anish kares v'aliruve belav. Only proper chametz alone, that's where you're going to have the punishment of kares, but we would not have the punishment of kares for a mixture. There it's only a simple prohibition. So man shamas adama aliruve belav. Who told us beforehand that the opinion, who told us beforehand that a chametz gomer, if in a mixture, is prohibited? In a lav, Rabbi Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And yet, it doesn't mention anything about hardened chametz. So it would seem to be that Rabbi Yehuda is right, that our Mishnah can't be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer only mentions the hardened, the mixture of chametz, and doesn't mention anything about a prohibition of hardened chametz even alone. So from here we can learn, Rabbi Eliezer Leslie. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold of a Torah prohibition of eating chametz that is not really made to be eaten, like just beginning to rise dough and other hard pastes and that are not really made to be eaten. Rabbi Eliezer ruve belav minole. And how does Rabbi Eliezer know that the Torah prohibits eating chametz that is mixed with other things? Because it says all leavening shall not be eaten. So Gemara says, well, then why isn't it included also in the Torah prohibition to the punishment of kares? Because as we said in verse 19, it says anybody that eats machmetzes, anybody that eats leavening, their soul's cut off. So the Gemara says that kol, that extra word of anybody or any, that's for something else. That's to tell you that the prohibition of eating chametz, perhaps only if you made flour and water and it rose by itself. How do you know that if you add a leavening agent, you add an agent that will make it rise? How do you know that that too is a Torah prohibition? Therefore, we learn that it says kol ochel machmetzes, anybody that eats leavening, meaning that it has in it not only is it chametz, but it has in it an agent that makes it chametz, and still you're going to be held as eating chametz. And that the punishment is kares. So then I can say that maybe when it says it says all leavening shall not be eaten. Maybe it's not coming for a mixture. Maybe it's also only coming to tell you that anything that has a leavening agent in it is also going to be a part of the prohibition. So rather, the teaching of Rabbi Eliezer is not from the word machmetzes, leavening, but kol machmetzes, from any leavening. Oh, so in verse 20, where it says any leavening, so there, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's going to be any leavening, even if it's in a mixture. So the Gemara says, no, I need that for something else. I need that to teach you that women are also included in the prohibition of eating chametz. Nashim. So the Gemara says, what do I need a special teaching for that? With Rav Yehuda. Amarav Nafka. I know that already from another teaching from Yehuda Amarav, which is always included. The Amar of Yehuda Amarav, as Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Kol Tana, and similarly we have in the Academy of Rabbi Shmuel, it's taught. Amar Kra, it says in the pasuk, Ish Isha Kiyasim Kalchatas Adam, a man or a woman, if they were to do any of the sins of the Torah. So since it says Isha Kiyasim Kalchatas Adam, if they were to do any sin, and it says male or female, Hishra Kasav Ish Leisha L'Chalal Sheshem Torah. A man and a woman are equal in any prohibitions of the Torah. And so therefore, what I need a special teaching to tell me that women are prohibited in eating chametz, that's included in every prohibition of the Torah. Why would I need a special teaching for that, to say kol ochel machmetzes, anybody that eats chametz? Itzrach. No, I do need such a teaching. Now we go to Mem Gimel Amud Beis 43b. Because I may have thought that this would be different. Because the Torah juxtaposes and really links the prohibition of chametz to the mitzvah of matzah. And we know that time-bound mitzvahs, generally women are exempt. So perhaps women are exempt of eating matzah as a general rule. The women are exempt of Torah obligations of a positive commandment that are time-bound. And obviously, you only have to eat matzah at a certain time of year, so the women would be exempt. And if they're exempt of the matzah, they'd also be exempt of eating chametz, and they would be allowed to eat chametz. So if women can eat chametz, then I need a special teaching to say that they are not allowed to eat chametz. Perhaps I may have thought anybody obligated in matzah, eating matzah, is also prohibited in chametz. Because generally we would say women are exempt of eating matzah. They have a matzah mitzvah saseshas mangarama because it's a Torah obligation, but it's a time-bound mitzvah which generally is not incumbent upon women. Ema babal teichel chametz. Nami lesnu. So maybe that's also an exemption of the prohibition of eating chametz. Kamash Malan, that's why we have a special teaching in the Torah, Ki Chol Oicha Machmetzes, because anybody that eats leavening agent or leavened bread. And now actually we do the reverse comparison. Since the Torah tells us that anybody that eats machmetzes is included in the prohibition, and then the Torah links the mitzvah of matzah to the prohibition of chametz. So we actually reverse this comparison. It's Rabbi Nami lachilas matzah. So women are obligated in the mitzvah of matzah, even though it's time bound, and nevertheless it's an equal obligation on men and women. Kid Rabbi Lazar, Damar Rabbi Lazar, Nashim Chayavas Bechilas Matzah Dvar Torah. Like Rabbi Lazar said, that women are obligated in the mitzvah of eating matzah from on a Torah level. Shenema, for it says, as the Torah compares and juxtaposes and links the prohibition of eating chametz to the mitzvah of eating matzah. And as we saw, that the Torah says, Ki chol machmetzes, anybody eating chametz, meaning that the obligation or the prohibition of eating chametz applies to everyone. And therefore, the obligation of eating matzah also applies to everyone. So women, since they are prohibited in eating chametz, they're also included in the obligation of eating matzah. Now, umay chaz is the high kol l'rabi nashim. So, and why do you say that the term kol, every, over here is including women? Umafke seruva, but say it doesn't mean to include a mixture of chametz mixed with other foods. Maybe it's coming to tell you the inclusion of chametz mixed with other things. Gemara says mistabra. Since we're talking about people eating chametz, it says anybody that eats chametz, ki chol ochel machmetzah. So we're talking about the person, not the item. So therefore, what we're going to add, what the kol is including or adding to us, is people that are going to eat the chametz, and so it includes also women. However, but if we're talking about those that are eating the chametz, mar ben acholim, you want to add a type of chametz that is eaten. That would be a prohibition. So therefore, it's not logical. The inclusion, the text itself, is including another, including or broadening the prohibition of those that eat chametz. Maskav l'Rav the Rav Huna ben Rav Nassan, Rabbi Nassan, the father of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nassan. There were several Rav Hunas, and this is Rav Huna, the father of Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Nassan. So his name is Rabbi Nassan, and there were multiple Rabbi Nassans. So this is a Rav Nassan. Is that true that when the Torah is talking about the eaters, it can't be talking about what is eaten, and it doesn't add the prohibited item? It's not true. We find that it sometimes does include a prohibited item. Vatanya, we learned, and this is in regards to the forbidden fats from an animal that is a carbon. We learned anybody that eats chelev, the forbidden fats, from an animal asher yakriv, an animal which is brought to the mizbeach, brought close, meaning it is kachim. Ainli ela chelev tamim. So since it says asher yakriv, which can be brought to the mizbeach, I would know that it is an unblemished animal. Sharoy likariv, because it is worthy of coming to the mizbeach. That's what it says asher yakriv. Chelev ba'alei mume minayin. How do you know that an animal that was gifted, donated to the Beis HaMikdash, and it has a blemish, so it can't itself be brought onto the mizbeach, and therefore would have to be sold off, and the money would be used for kachim. So how do we know that the forbidden fats in there are also prohibited? Min ha-behema. It says of the behema, and ha-behema tells me any animal, including whether it has a blemish or not. Chelev chulin minayin. How do we know if it's not even donated? The forbidden fats are prohibited. Talmud Loima kichol. That's why it says for anybody that eats. Now, for anybody that eats, it's talking about the person eating, and yet you're including a broader sense of what is eaten, expanding the prohibited items. Not only an animal that is brought as a korban, and not only an animal that was gifted as a korban but has a blemish that can't be brought, and not it would include even a non-sanctified animal. But it's talking about the extra word kol, any, is talking about in the context anybody that eats and of any animal. So the forbidden fats of any animal. So now the kol is not talking about the eaten, but the eater, right? Saying where it says, of course, there everybody is already included in the prohibition. So there's no reason to think that anybody's not included. So when the Torah said for anybody that eats, that's superfluous. It could just say, like all other prohibitions, ki or it could just say if someone eats. Why does it have to say anybody? Why does it have to say kol? The leka oichlin, marben necholim. So there's no one to add. So that extra superfluous word is telling you that the verse is all encompassing anybody that eats, anybody that eats anything that has chaylev, and that's the extra kol. But hacha, the ika oichlin, over here there is someone to add with in the prohibition of eating, meaning the eater, the person, and the reason we need that is because the Torah had linked chametz and matzah, and I may have thought that women are exempt. So there actually is a need for the Torah to say kichol ocha machmetzes, anybody that eats leavening. So lo shaviklu lo oichlin amar ben acholim. So I have to add that first before I move on to add items that are going to be included. So we have the interpretation of the pasuk where it says kichol ocha machmetzes, for anybody that eats leavening. The leavening tells me that it's even if it has an agent, it's not naturally fermenting, rising. It's even if something was added to it, and anybody that eats it, whether a male or a female, would be included in the prohibition. And and the linkage that the Torah links the chametz and matzah to tell you that even though that it's a time-bound mitzvah, women are obligated in matzah equally in the obligation, just as they're equally obligated in the prohibition of not eating chametz or any leaven. V'rabbanan, the leslu iruv, and the chachamim who don't say that a chametz by mixture is going to be included. As we saw earlier, that Rabbi Eliezer said that chametz in a mixture is going to be prohibited, and the chachamim say no, that chametz, once it's in a mixture, it's not prohibited. So according to them, what do they do with the extra kol? The leslu eruv kol darshi. So obviously, they don't think that the word kol, any leavening in verse 20, is of any significance. And it's not teaching us anything. And therefore, in verse 19, where it says anybody that eats chametz, also the any is not significant. It doesn't mean anything because it doesn't seem superfluous. So then how do they know that women are included in this prohibition? Maybe the linkage between chametz and matzah excludes women from the prohibition of chametz. Minalu, so kollel darshi, since they don't think that kol is a source of drash, kichol darshi. No, the Gemara says that it doesn't only say kol, any, but it says for any, because any. So kichol, that's a lot of wordage, 2 extra words, a lot of verbiage, 2 extra words. So that's superfluous enough to say that that's coming to tell you that it includes women. So for Rabbi Eliezer, we can say that kol is to tell you that women are included in the in eating chametz, machmetzes, eating leavening. Now, but you have the extra word ki as well. And we said before that Rabbi Eliezer agrees that even though we're talking about those that eat the chametz or those that are doing the eating, nevertheless, if there's an extra word there and we don't need it anymore to include those that are eating. So then it will include that which is eaten. So why did Rabbi Eliezer also include the mixture of chametz from there? Rabbi Eliezer, if you're going to tell me, no, he doesn't think that the word ki at the beginning, because or for, that's not an extra word. That's actually not true. We have another place that he does consider it a superfluous extra word and use it as a drash. But Tani, we learned, so bal taktiru. It says in relation to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Mizbeach, on the altar, you're not allowed to bring up any leavening. It says, so bal taktiru, don't bring leavening on them, anything leavened on the Mizbeach. Eli ela kule. That's only if it's completely so. How do you know that if it's only partially, half a kazayas size? Miktsasa minai. How do we know that if it's less than the requisite amount, it's not complete? Talmud lemek kol. That's why it says all chametz shall not go on the mizbeach. Kol saor, any leavening shall not go on the mizbeach. Eruva minai. How do you know that even a mixture of chametz with something else cannot go on the mizbeach? Talmud lemek kichol. It says because any leavening. So you see that Rabbi Eliezer says that even the word ki is a drash. Man shamas le'darish kol. Whose opinion is that kol is extra and teaches us that it means even less than the what's mentioned, meaning it includes other things. And over there it's a smaller size. Rabbi Eliezer okadarish ki kol, and he does say that the extra word ki is also a source that teaches us that chametz, not only chametz alone, but also partial chametz and also mixture of chametz is prohibited to go on the mizbeach. So to over here, it should include ki as well, should teach us kasha. The Gemara says that is a question of Eliezer why he doesn't use that as a source for drash. Nevertheless, that is the source of Rabbi Eliezer. Tomorrow we'll continue with the sources for prohibition of chametz, mixture of chametz, and